Jerusalem has tricked us for 3,000 years. For centuries, every emperor, knight, and archaeologist arrived in this city with the same specific expectation. They were looking for a dead body. They were hunting for the tomb of King Solomon, expecting a final resting place filled with bones, dust, and the silence of the grave. They were wrong. When modern archaeologists finally cracked the code, they didn't find a grave. They found something that didn't fit the story anyone had written. It wasn't a place for the dead, it was a machine for the living. And that discovery created a serious problem that history wasn't prepared to face. Because if Solomon isn't in a tomb, where is he? And more importantly, what did he leave behind that was so dangerous it had to be buried under half a mile of limestone and hidden from the world for millennia? The stakes could not be higher. Jerusalem isn't just a dig site, it is a pressure cooker. Beneath the surface lie tunnels and chambers that the city has hidden carefully. Locals often warn that the earth here has a memory. Every time someone tries to dig too deep, chaos follows. In the early 1900s, a group of British aristocrats known as the Parker Expedition tried to tunnel under the city to find the Ark of the Covenant. They triggered riots, fled for their lives, and were nearly killed by an angry mob. The lesson was clear. The city guards its secrets aggressively. But the new team wasn't deterred. They believed that the previous hunters failed because they were looking for a monument, while Solomon had actually built a bunker. The King of Gold and Ghosts. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, you have to understand the man who started it all. Solomon wasn't just a biblical figure, he was the ancient world's ultimate tycoon. He inherited a kingdom at a young age and turned it into a global superpower. Ancient records claim his net worth would make modern billionaires look like paupers. He didn't just hoard gold, he controlled the copper mines of the Timna Valley, a resource so valuable in the ancient world it was the equivalent of controlling today's oil fields. He built the first temple, a structure so clad in gold it reportedly blinded people when the sun hit it. Historical texts describe his throne as being made of ivory and overlaid with the finest gold, flanked by mechanical lions that some legends claim could actually move. This was a man obsessed with legacy, technology, and power. But here is the mystery. We have no physical trace of him. No body, no crown, no signet ring. It is an archaeological void. For centuries, this void drove men to madness. Medieval knights dug until their hands bled, convinced the king lay below the Temple Mount. They all failed because they made the same mistake. They assumed Solomon wanted to be found. They assumed he would leave a breadcrumb trail. But a king this wise, who possessed knowledge that some say came from other worlds, wouldn't leave his legacy exposed. He would bury it deep in a place that didn't look like a tomb at all. The radar anomaly. The breakthrough didn't come from a treasure map, but from a mistake in the archives. A modern team, inspired by the controversial but brilliant work of archaeologist Eilat Mazar, began scanning the slopes near the city of David. They weren't using shovels, they were using ground-penetrating radar to look for voids, pockets of air where there should be solid rock. It was tedious, grueling work. The team spent months dragging heavy equipment over steep, dusty slopes, fighting the blistering heat and the constant, suffocating oversight of local authorities. Every day yielded nothing but solid limestone. But then, the radar picked up something impossible. Straight lines. Nature doesn't build in straight lines. Deep beneath the chaotic geology, the scans revealed a tunnel system that was clearly artificial. The location matched a blank spot in ancient tax records, a piece of land that had been deliberately erased from the books. It was a ghost plot, land that technically didn't exist in the registry. After a heavy rainstorm washed away the topsoil, a small, unnatural depression appeared in the hillside. It was the first time in 3 millennia that the entrance had seen sunlight. The team stood around the hole, looking down into the darkness. The air rising from the depths was cool and still. It was the breath of the underworld, the gauntlet. As the team descended, the mood shifted instantly. The air grew heavy and the sounds of the modern city above faded into a ringing silence. These weren't the grand ceremonial hallways of Egypt designed for processions. These were military-grade defenses. The tunnels twisted sharply, appearing to loop back on themselves, designed to confuse anyone without a map. Passages narrowed to a squeeze, forcing intruders to move single file, making them vulnerable to ambush. Then came the traps. The team discovered false floors, slabs of stone balanced precariously over hollow pits. One report describes a terrifying moment when a junior researcher placed his weight on a seemingly solid flagstone. The stone shifted with a sickening grinding sound, tilting downward. If he hadn't been roped to the safety line, he would have slid into a dark fissure that dropped 20 feet into jagged rocks. This site was still active. It was still hunting. Faded symbols on the walls weren't decorative. They were warnings. Geometric patterns and mathematical ciphers etched into the stone suggested that this wasn't a path to a burial, but a test. The team realized with a shiver that whoever built this wanted to ensure that only the worthy or the highly intelligent could reach the end. They had to crawl, climb, and solve physical puzzles just to advance a few yards. The claustrophobia was intense. The walls felt like they were closing in, protecting the heart of the mountain, the sealed door. At the end of the gauntlet, the tunnels abruptly stopped at a massive stone slab. It was a dead end. Or so it seemed. The slab was a perfect seal, cut with such precision that not even a blade of grass could fit between the door and the frame. There were no handles, no hinges, and no keyholes. It was a smooth, imposing face of rock that had been shut for 3,000 years. The team tapped the stone. It didn't sound like solid rock. It sounded like a drum. There was a massive hollow space behind it. Using hydraulic jacks, the team managed to inch the stone aside. The friction was immense. The sound of stone on stone screaming through the tunnel. As the seal finally broke, a hiss of air escaped. It was stale and dry, carrying the faint, impossible scent of frankincense and cedar, the smell of the temple. It was a preservation seal, designed to keep the oxygen out and the history in. When the lead archaeologist shined a high-powered beam into the gap, the darkness didn't just retreat, it exploded with light. The reflection was so intense it momentarily blinded the camera lenses. The Chamber of Reflections. The team squeezed through the gap and entered a room that defied logic. The walls were plated in gold. Not just painted, plated. Sheets of beaten gold covered the limestone, turning the entire chamber into a mirror. It was sensory overload. Everywhere they looked, their own reflections stared back at them, distorted by the ancient metal. Gold vessels, jewelry, and artifacts were stacked on stone shelves with military precision. At the center stood a 7-branched menorah, untouched by rust or decay, confirming this was a first temple site. The craftsmanship was alien in its perfection. There was no dust. The air seal had worked perfectly. The room looked exactly as it had the day the masons walked out 3,000 years ago. But the silence in the room was heavy. The team scanned the floor for a sarcophagus. They looked for the bones of the king. They looked for the burial shrouds. They found nothing. There was no body, no coffin, no death. The realization hit them hard. This wasn't a tomb. The room felt less like a memorial and more like a safe deposit box. The artifacts weren't left for the afterlife. They were being stored for the future. The sheer value of the gold in the room was in the millions, perhaps billions, but it was just sitting there, unguarded by anything but the earth. The real treasure. Once the shock of the gold wore off, the team realized the metal was just a distraction. The gold was the bait. The real value was in the corner, in the shadows where the light barely reached. Neatly stacked piles of clay tablets and a small, sealed chest bearing a star-shaped seal sat on a modest stone table. The tablets didn't contain prayers or hymns. Preliminary analysis of the visible text suggested they contained data, blueprints, advanced mathematics, geologic maps. Some scholars on the team whispered about the shamir, the legendary technology Solomon supposedly used to cut stone without iron tools. Could these tablets contain the schematics? This was a library. Solomon hadn't built a tomb to stroke his ego, he had built an archive to save his culture's wisdom from the collapse he knew was coming. He knew the Babylonians were coming. He knew the Romans were coming. So he took the most dangerous, powerful knowledge of his time and buried it where no army could find it. The sealed chest, still unopened, is rumored to contain the key, a cipher meant to decode the symbols on the walls. The team stared at it, terrified to touch it. If this box contained the source of Solomon's wisdom, opening it might be the most dangerous thing an archaeologist could do. This discovery changes the timeline of human history. It implies the ancients knew their world was ending and prepared for it with a level of foresight we didn't think they possessed. But it also leaves us with a terrifying question. The excavation was halted shortly after the chamber was breached. The site was secured by government forces and reports were buried in bureaucracy. Why? Because a discovery this big disrupts everything: politics, religion, and history. We went looking for a dead king, but we found a message in a bottle. And if the ancients went to such lengths to hide it, building traps and decoys to keep us out, maybe we should be worried about what happens when we finally read it. Solomon didn't leave us a body to mourn. He left us a warning. And now that we've found it, there is no turning back. If you want to know what else is buried under our feet, hit that subscribe button. Welcome to the Mysteries Uncovered Files.